As you just heard, we have two very special guests with us this morning. They have been very involved in the conversations involving fraternity and involving higher education. I hope that this becomes a very engaging discussion and a discussion that's going to lead to action at your chapters, back on your campuses. You'll see on the screens to the left and right of me, there's going to be a number that you can text. If you'd like to ask either Caitlin or Alan a question, we'll make sure that we get to those later on in the program. I'm going to start the program with questions that we received prior to Conclave from many of you via social media. We'll use those to get the conversation going and then turn it over to the crowd and continue the dialogue. So let me start with Caitlin. Everyone in the audience is very aware of the Dark Power of Fraternities article, and so much so that we chose to name the session after the article. Why did you choose to write about fraternities after more than a year of researching and write about them in this way?
I always knew at some point in my life I was going to write a very long piece about fraternities. I was always fascinated by them. I came to UVA as a transfer student, and so I was able to look at them in a different light than students who had come from the very beginning and sort of been taught about them and gone to sort of the pre-rush events and kind of learned about them, and I was just fascinated. They seemed like the center of the universe to me. I remember my very first weekend at Virginia, somebody said, well, we're going to go to these fraternity parties. And I remember just going down Rugby Road, this was like 1980 or 81, and just music was pouring out of these places and kids were coming in and out of them. And I remember feeling really very much like an outsider because I didn't, I was an outsider to the university coming in, and I certainly didn't understand all these Greek letters, and kids felt so comfortable in these places. And I really have this really strong memory of standing, when there's those fraternities that are like by the Bailey Art Museum and they're like in a little quad, just these huge, beautiful, partly crumbling, but sort of magisterial edifices. And in the center one, there was a big portico, and there was a fan light, and this guy was leaning this girl with his long hair back and kissing her, and it was like the cover of every romantic novel I'd ever read, or like a one sheet of every movie, and I just thought, I want to be that girl, but it seems, how could I ever be a person that would be respected there? Everybody's so inside, and so I was just really interested in them and cowed by them and mesmerized by them, and but then also learned we didn't talk, there was really no language to talk about sexual assault or college rape in that time, but there was just these rumblings you'd hear among the girls that something had happened, and what was it? And then I started dating a guy, a really nice guy who belonged to one of the fraternities, and he was a really nice guy, but it just wasn't a click, and so we went out to lunch, and in those days you would have like these formal exit interviews, like you would have, it's not you, it's me, and you'd have to really like process it all. It's a whole different time, and I was sort of saying, so basically I was breaking up with him, and he was a really nice guy, and at a certain point he said, okay, and then he grabbed my hand, he said, okay, Kate, but you have to promise me something. He said, promise me that you'll never go upstairs in a fraternity house. And at first I thought it was just like some jealousy thing, like that you wouldn't have another boyfriend or you wouldn't go with another. And I thought, oh yeah, I know all that. And he grabbed my hand. He was a very honest kid, and he said, no, promise me you'll never go upstairs in a fraternity house. And he really, it was clear that he was communicating something to me, and he really frightened me. And I really didn't do that, but there was just this kind of knowledge that something was going on, not all the time, and now I shall reveal that I did go on to marry my college sweetheart, a UVA SPE, so I can't say that so I come in peace, and I by no means demonize all of fraternity men in any way, but I was very aware of that, and then, so the answer, so many years later, I knew at some point I'd write about fraternities, and I was just gathering information. I didn't know what my angle was. I was really interested in social history, really interested in sort of the Greek revival in American history, why sort of the country turned from the Roman civilization to Greek civilization as kind of a national model. That was interesting to me. And I was just kind of Googling around, and I came across this document. I think it's SAE, and it was a risk management policy, which I now know is standard. I didn't know any of that. And I think their True Gentleman or whatever their thing is. And I was kind of paging through the PDF, and all of a sudden I see this picture of a young man, and he's holding a prayer book. He's at a graveyard, and I turned the page, and it was an incredibly explicit protocol for what you do if a brother dies as a result of something in the fraternity, what you do with his belongings, how you tell his parents, how you communicate to the national, what you do at the funeral if you're going to attend. And it just floored me that, wait a minute, here's this social club, and they're very explicitly saying what to do in the case of a death of a member. And then I called my editor, and I said, you can't believe what I'm looking at. And he said, what? I said, yeah, it's this protocol. And that got me real. So then I started researching, so what's this all about? And kind of learning about the firewall that was sort of erected to save the fraternity industry, this kind of firewall that was erected between the bad behavior of individual members and the national organization itself, and how preserving the fraternity industry really depended upon that. And I thought that was historically interesting. I thought it was morally interesting. And I was given great access to people like Pete Smithheisler, who made me feel much more positive about it than I originally felt. And so all those things coalesced. And then it was just supposed to be 2 or 3 months investigation. And so many people made themselves available to me on all sides of the story that I just kept reporting and reporting. So a long answer to a short question.
So there's a lot of people in the crowd who have spent a lot of time investing in fraternities, and that's the case for you, Alan. You've done it professionally. Yeah. You've done it as a volunteer with your own fraternity, Pi Kappa Alpha, and we heard about that in your introduction. Can you tell us why you have invested so much time in fraternity?
I appreciate that, Brian. I actually was thinking about that last night. So I've been a Pike, and thank you for not booing when that part was announced. I've been a Pike for 37 years, and I was telling somebody, I think in that 37 years, there are 2 years when I didn't hold a position of some kind. Now I'm on the Risk Awareness Foundation for the fraternity. That great line from Godfather 3 where he says, every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. I've been involved my whole life since I was 18 years old, and I think it's a fair question of why. The short answer would be, it's what I've always said is the parable, the nursery rhyme when I was a kid about this little boy, and it said when he was very, very good, he was very, very good, and when he was very, very bad, he was very, very bad. And what I tell people is I have seen the fraternity in its best form. My father had died of a heart attack 2 days before I graduated high school. And so when I came to college at Stetson, you could rush right away. And so I rushed the fraternity after being on campus for 2 weeks. And the fraternity and the older brothers in the fraternity played a remarkable role in helping a kid whose dad had died a few months before and who felt really lost. And so when I say when the little boy was good, he was very good, the role the fraternity played for me in helping me deal with my father's loss and having some older brothers kind of step in and fill an important role for me and help me get through all of that and be successful in college, I wanted to make sure that other people had the benefit of that other young men would have the experience of me becoming a leader and me becoming a better man because of those things. At the same time, during the time that I was an undergraduate at Stetson, the National came in when I was a second year and threw out half the chapter because of really bad behavior and things that were going on. And then those of us that were left, were left to craft the new chapter and to try to do it the right way. And so I certainly saw in my time there bad things, very bad things. And I think my involvement over these 37 years has been focused on how do we make sure that all that good that I believe fraternity can be, and I think there's no experience like it in the college setting, how do we make sure that that is what's happening for young men and that the bad things that Caitlin has talked about, and I know, Brian, that you're aware of being a national exec, that I've been aware of my whole life, that we move away from those kinds of things.
I think that's very encouraging for people in the audience to hear a dean of students being such an advocate for fraternities. And I'm gonna try and read a longer question that we received prior to the conclave, and it's for Alan. Okay. Similar to Caitlin's Dark Power of Fraternities article, our members are very familiar with the recent and later withdrawn Rolling Stone article involving UVA's Phi Psi chapter. What should fraternity men take away from that entire situation? And in addition to that, what is your response to the students, and maybe some of them are here in the audience as well, who would claim that the media is only interested in clickbait, sensationalist coverage, not covering or addressing the underlying issues that could actually help advance higher education?
So there are 3 questions in there, so I'm going to try to address each one chronologically in order. So the first part is, what are the takeaways that young men and fraternity men should have from that article? The takeaway that I don't want you to have, so I'm going to start with kind of a negative. The takeaway I don't want you to have is that sexual assault doesn't happen, and that it's routine for people to make up allegations of sexual assault. Because a lot of the fallout after, you had that article had 2 very big moments. One was when the article came out and there was a lot of debate about, oh my God, this is a huge problem, and what's wrong with UVA and what's wrong with fraternities. And then when the article fell apart, it swung the other way, and people said, see, this is Duke lacrosse, this stuff gets made up all the time, it's not true. What I would tell you is, as somebody both who's a fraternity man and a senior official, a dean and at a large flagship university, that sexual assault is a very real issue, it is a very real problem. It is something that is not unique, by the way, to the collegiate setting. It is not something that is unique to fraternity men or sorority women. It is a problem, it is a serious issue. In my view, a lot of it is driven from very fundamental misunderstandings of consent. There was a Kaiser Family Foundation study that the Washington Post reported on about a month ago, and the difference in terms of how young people perceive what consent was to have sexual activity. I remember an earlier study of that where young women were asked, college-age women, whether you could give consent by bodily movements, and women felt no. And you asked young men the same question, and they said, oh yes, she can be signaling consent to me by what she's doing with her body. That's alarming to me, because it tells me that at the end of the day, for those of you in the room and the men that are back at the chapter, we have to have serious conversations about what it means to have consent in sexual activity. So that's the first takeaway, is I don't want people believing that this is somehow a made-up crisis or a made-up issue. It isn't. It is something that is serious, and that what I have said, and Brian's heard me say this at the NIC when I was chairman to all the fraternity members that were there, we have 75 men's fraternities in the NIC, I want fraternities to be seen as leading on this issue. I don't think there's a tremendous amount of leadership around the country and on this particular subject, and I'd like fraternity men to be the leaders in solving that problem. So that's the first piece of it. The other part of the takeaway that I would stress is, and this didn't get a lot of publication or airplay, I approached the Phi Psis about the report that we had gotten well before the Rolling Stone article ever came out, and they did not circle the wagons. They did not say to me, well, Dean Groves, what's your proof, or whatever. In fact, quite the opposite. The leadership of that chapter, when they came in to meet with me, was stunned by the allegations and said, we need to go find out what happened. And they were very cooperative, very forthcoming, and I also called the National, and the National immediately sent somebody down to work with them. So one of my takeaways from that was that the young men who led that chapter were stunned by the report that the university had received and was looking into, and wanted to figure out, oh my God, could that have happened? And what do we do? What can we do to try to figure out and get to the bottom of it? The other thing, by the way, even after the article came out and all the damage that it did, of course, and then when things ultimately fell away, the chapter did not become embittered, even though I think they very easily could have. They had a planning retreat with some of their alums, and they invited me, and I came and sat with them at a hotel ballroom where they planned what they were going to do going forward. They had a dinner at the end of the year for graduation, and they invited me to be there with their parents. And so they could very easily have turned against the university and said, we feel like we were hung out there in this whole process. And they didn't, because quite frankly, what was happening behind the scenes that the public never saw was a very close relationship between the university, me and my office, and them as we tried to figure out what could have happened, what may have happened, what's the evidence. Let's see, Brian, I'm trying to remember the back half of your story, of your question to me.
The issue of sensationalist coverage.
Oh, thank you.
Clickbait.
So clickbait. Yes, I'll be candid with you. There are certain media sources that I am convinced from experience are driven by clickbait. They exist to simply have a sensational title, a sensational issue, and to get somebody to click on so that they can then say to advertisers, look how many hits we got. There was a young man for an online publication that's very popular that wrote some things when the Rolling Stone issue was at its height. And some of it was just objectively false and sensational, and I remember one piece in particular. And I sent him an email at one point, and I rarely lose my cool, but I was angry, and I sent him an email and I said, you know, that's a lie, it's fundamentally false, and I can't believe you don't know that it's false, or that you would never even come and ask me about it before you would write this piece, so that you at least had the full understanding of the facts. And then I reflected on that a little bit, and I sent a second email, and I said, you know what, actually, I feel for you, because I know that your job hinges on whether or not you get a bunch of clicks and hits on this article. And so your whole motivation is, based on your employer, is to create an article that lots of people click on because it looks sensational and because your title is inflammatory. And I'm sorry that you're in that kind of a role. That said, the vast majority of journalism is fact-based and positive. If you look at The Atlantic, where Caitlin writes, it's an exceptional magazine, and I could go through a number of them. Don't forget that the Rolling Stone article, which was grossly irresponsible, and I think Columbia called, you know, one of the worst journalistic malpractice cases ever, that it was undone by the Washington Post. You know, it was undone by a young man, a young writer for the Washington Post, a Virginia Tech graduate. So that in itself, we had a lot of fun with that. But you know, a young reporter who said, this doesn't smell right, this doesn't sound right, and started to call people and ask questions. And that led to the December 5th Washington Post story and subsequent follow-up stories where they did terrific journalism. So what I would say to you is, you know, we tend to be suspicious in this era of the media, and yet I think there's a lot of great journalism going on, a lot of great journalism, a lot of balanced journalism. And we just have to learn as consumers which sites to avoid, because if we stop clicking on those articles, they're going to be damaged. And if we focus our attention on the mainstream good media, and when people say mainstream, I know they tend to think left now because there's a political divide. I'm not talking about a left-right divide. I'm talking about good journalism that is based on facts where reporters do their work.
So when people talk about things that we love, we respond emotionally. And Caitlin, with your article, could you summarize, I guess, how your readers responded to the Dark Power of Fraternity? And fraternity men, non-fraternity men, how did they respond? Was it what you were expecting?
The big shock was the incredibly positive response from the fraternity industry. I mean, we were, you know, talk about The Atlantic being different from Rolling Stone. I mean, The Atlantic, everything goes through multiple levels of legal vetting before it gets published. And for this piece in particular, since we were shining a bright light on an organization that's composed of many attorneys and it's, you know, national and huge, we wanted to be sure we had everything exactly right. And we sent, not only, we of course would always send every quote that we're going to use to the person who said it, the checkers sent the surrounding language around a quote. I mean, so we knew that what we had was right, but we thought the fraternity industry would be furious. And within it being online, very small number of hours, I received an email from a very senior person in the industry, and the title of the email was, "Thank you." And emails like that started coming in, and in the beginning I was distrustful of these emails. I thought, oh, they're just trying to do a PR move, like, oh, we're so unbothered by what she has to say that we've partnered with her, and I wouldn't go and speak at fraternities early on because of that. And then I realized, no, it was very open-minded, it was very open-hearted, it was that the desire for self-reflection was really 100% at a lot of places. And there was a non-defensiveness about it from within the fraternity. We were just shocked. I mean, all day long, the first 2 days, everyone in the magazine and I were like, we couldn't believe it. And it really impressed me deeply. And so that was the big surprise. And being at places like this has just been a huge surprise. There's been a lot of response in the terms of, in the last kind of year and a half since it's been out, a lot of people reaching out to me to tell me their fraternity stories, and sometimes I'll take those calls and emails, and that's sort of been interesting to hear the variety and the range of stories that people have to tell. And then the question always being given this strange role that people ask me, well, what fraternity would you recommend, or is there any fraternity that you would recommend? And that's been this very strange feeling to have parents coming to me, so that's been a strange response to it. So I would say the biggest surprise has been the reaction from within the fraternity industry to the essay. Oh, and this is another thing. And I don't know if this will be greeted with such a sanguine response by you, but I thought that someplace like Total Frat Move would really hate the article, and they published a very long piece really praising the article, and their take on it was, we feel as members of fraternities that we've been exploited by the nationals for years, and that they take our money for risk management and insurance, and our dues go up because of that, but when we really need it, they disappear, and they throw us under the bus. I'm not saying they're accurate in that, but that the members, as reflected by that article and other communications that I got, that members of fraternities felt vindicated by the article in that way. That was interesting, very interesting, and so that a lot of people were, that the article was such an omnibus of ideas, it was such a huge article, it encompassed so many aspects of the experience, and that a lot of people were coming back to me and saying, yes, that's true. And I felt for me personally that it really took a lot of courage. I was really afraid the night before it came. I thought, what have I done? Like, do you see a lot of women in the room? Like, it's like, here I am, this lone woman, and I've taken on this all-male, powerful industry. I thought, what have I done? And I have been only treated kindly, graciously, and with respect by the whole industry. So that has just been very, very surprising.
So on the insurance issue, it's a very, very complicated topic. As an attorney and also as a former executive and chairman of your fraternity, how would you respond to that part of what Caitlin said, Alan?
Yeah, it's funny as the wheels turn in my head, because you're right. I'm a litigator of a long standing. I'm a dean at a school, and I'm a former chair of my fraternity, so there's a lot of hats going on in there. Yeah, I'm now on the Risk Awareness Foundation for Pike, so that's the 5-person board that manages the insurance program and the claims and the things like that. So I'm back in a role now where I see those things as they come in. It's hard because the fraternities, the national fraternity or the international fraternity, has a fiduciary obligation to all the chapters. So it has to make decisions that are in the best interest of the entire group, even as it looks at a particular group that may have a claim or an issue that's going on. Candidly, the international fraternity also has an obligation to try to ensure the survival of the organization, right? And so it is going to make decisions that it believes are in the best interest of the collective whole. Oftentimes, if that means that one chapter, and the easy example I can give you is when the decision's made to close a chapter, right? Everyone knows I've made those decisions, you've made those decisions. You and I made that decision together at UVA. That's a hard situation, because you know that there are scores of alums and maybe some current brothers who are good guys who maybe weren't involved in something that happened. But to protect the greater whole, you have to make that decision. Where I do think fraternities have done a better job, because I've been involved, as you noted, Brian, for a very long time. I was on the staff in the mid-'80s, so it goes back a long time. I think the fraternities as a whole have gotten better about how they address the claims. I think they've gotten much better in their programming to help prevent tragedies in the first place. I mean, I think we're having conversations at places like this around the country that didn't used to happen, right? We're having hard, difficult conversations about sexual assault, about alcohol, about hazing, in ways that we never used to discuss them. And so my view is that we're doing a better job of that. And I'm going to put in a quick plug. I have been watching your Balanced Man program for a long time. I think SigEp was a leader in that area. I think that you should be very proud of what you have done. And I think that it's only gotten stronger over the years as you've tinkered with it. My understanding is the vast majority of your chapters subscribe to this, and I commend you for that, because I think SigEp has helped lead the industry in a lot of ways on having those kind of conversations. I'm also going to give a real quick plug to SAE. So I'm a lot older than you are, and I remember in the 1980s when issues started popping up, things like HIV and issues that were very scary, that nobody knew what was going on, and there were a lot of other issues, including mental health issues. And SAE, I remember, was the first fraternity that set up this group called the Men's Health Group within SAE, and they started to go out and have conversations with young men at conferences about safe sex, which was taboo and probably then killed a number of older alums who were hearing that for the first time and thought that, oh my God, why are we talking about this? So those are difficult conversations, but I feel that we're doing a much better job than we've done before. But at the same time, we have to understand that the international organization has a fiduciary obligation to all the chapters and has to make difficult decisions sometimes about what is in the greater whole's interest versus the interest of one particular chapter or one particular group of young men. And those decisions aren't made lightly, but they are difficult.
So Caitlin, in your, I guess now years of research and response and conversations about fraternity, the question that I received most frequently when we were preparing for this session is, do you now believe that fraternities are dark? And what needs to change?
Well, the essay was called The Dark Power of Fraternities. So I was looking at the way that fraternities are exceedingly powerful. People always say, well, why don't colleges just get rid of fraternities? Well, you can't. Those young men have a constitutionally it's an implied right from freedom of assembly. They have freedom of association. You can't tell it just because you've enrolled in college that you can't belong to the Sierra Club. They have a right to belong to whatever private club they want to belong to. What I've noticed is that I think you're very apt. There's very, very good. Look what's here today. Whenever you see some egregious thing that's happened at a fraternity chapter, you get online and you investigate that chapter for the last 5 years, it was almost always a boiling pot of water. Just on the back, that lid of that pot was rattling and rattling and rattling, and then finally it boiled over. So I think that there is an element for some fraternity chapters, and it's not an insignificant number, that are really dangerous places that really have kind of gone rogue. And what I see is kind of two impulses that are deep within the fraternity movement that are somewhat at odds with each other. One is, I think there's absolutely a movement for reform, and as I say, it's absolutely open-hearted. I've talked to so many fraternities with very upper level people at fraternities about it, and they're really serious about wanting to reform. But there's a deep old thing about fraternities, which is recruitment and growth. You look at the earliest documents of fraternities, it's kind of a biblical thing, like my brothers in Christ, like going forward, spreading the good news. That's almost explicitly said in some of these 19th century documents. And fraternities are always we were number one, during Rush we were number one, we had the most young men wanted, we pledged the most, that this idea of growth and spreading, and it's a very American idea, the business that is bigger is better. And I guess you could say an argument is, done properly, recruitment and reform are hand in hand, because you're recruiting the right kind of young men with that are going to improve the overall organization. But there are a lot of chapters where it's just get as many men in as you can and be number one. And that's why I think the kind of reform that you all are now looking into and sort of legislating it for all the chapters, I think that's a very wise thing to consider. I've written about Phi Delta in the Washington Post. It's whenever I'm asked on air, I often get call-in shows, is there any fraternity you can endorse? I say, I don't endorse any, but I know that ever since Phi Delta went to alcohol-free housing, their risk management claims dropped, the dollar amounts of the claims dropped 85%, and the numbers of the claims dropped 95% is the dollar amount. The numbers, so that is so many fewer women that were sexually assaulted, so many fewer men who came to great ill through over alcohol consumption. It isn't perfect, but it's a tremendous improvement. And if I were and I always tell young men saying, should I look into fraternities? I said, if you do, go to Phi Delta. And I think when you have something like that, that's an initial think of the guys who say, I'm not even going to look at that place that has alcohol-free housing. Think of all the guys you're cutting off before they even come through the door. Think of all the guys who are going to cause major problems down the road who say, oh, there's one that has rules, there's one that has policies, that's not what I'm looking for. There's a big self-selection process that goes on, and being able to cut some of that out at the very beginning can help reform and recruitment be in alignment instead of being opposing goals for a fraternity.
So we have a lot of chapter leaders that are here. If you were to summarize those thoughts and give these leaders a charge of what to do when they get back on their campus, what would you tell them to do?
I think my experience is that what's really hard for chapter leaders, it's really hard in the fraternity world, is that there's a developmental task. Now this is critic of fraternity speaking. There's a developmental task that you all are asking the youngest members to do that I don't know if it's developmentally appropriate, which is that you're saying to really young guys, 18-year-old guys, 19-year-old guys, come in and have friendship, lifelong friendship, a place, a home, mentoring, all of that. But we also need you to be whistleblowers on us. We also need you to right away, if something happens that's like hazing, if something happens that's untoward, if you see an older brother doing something, we need you to be our whistleblower, and we need you to get in contact, and we need you to call this 1-800 number. That is a really tall task for an 18-year-old. I think that's really hard, and I think chapter presidents grapple with that all the time, that at the one hand, here's your welcoming brotherhood. On the other hand, you may see these really frightening things, and you need to be the whistleblower. And, you know, frankly, there are guys in fraternity chapters who do some of the worst behavior, who, let's face it, are the most charismatic guys, the funniest guys, the guys with the most girls a lot of times, the guys who fill a certain role, you know, and I can think back to guys when I was young that I'm sure if there had been risk management policy, which there was zero, would have been violating every single one of them on the books, but were the guys that you wanted to hang close to. You know, you wanted to be around them when they were walking across grounds. They were funny, they were off the cuff, and I think that's just an endemic problem. But I think the main thing I would tell, so I think what happens to guys when they come to these events is they get really fired up. And they're around all these like killjoy adults like me, and they're like, yeah, that woman, that older woman, she's making some good points. I am gonna bring those good points back. And then you get back and everybody's getting ready for the big party, and you're the wet blanket that went off to some convention, and it's like, calm down, you know, like, you know, really glad you went. I wanna hear more about that. Maybe like in a month, you just write that all up. You just bring that up at the chapter meeting. Fabulous. Don't tell me about it. I'm planning this event and everybody's really excited about it. The one thing I would say to you all that I think is meaningful to young men, because if you you know, I have 17-year-old boys. I have twins at home. If you start telling really young men about dangerous things that could happen if you get on the roof of your fraternity, it's nothing. Crickets, you know, the same thing. I'll tell you, the first night I went, and I'm a scaredy cat, the first night I went to college, where did I go? There was a kid at our college who was from the local area, and he knew of a reservoir that you could swim in at night. And so I'm like, that's a great idea. You know, to hell with this orientation program. Let's get in a bunch of cars and sneak up to this reservoir and sneak underneath, that's at a quarry, and sneak underneath the do not trespass and go over the fence and do all these things. And thank God nobody drowned. But there was alcohol, and we were swimming, and we were idiots, and we were young, and we had a great time, and we went back. And now, as 53 years old, I go, geez, this was a really dangerous thing to do. It seemed like a great idea. I can't tell you what a great idea it seemed like, and I can't tell you what a great time it was.
I don't think that's being endorsed by the board, by the
way.
Right.
But here's the one thing I think you can bring back to young men, 18-year-old men. If I made a list of 10 different things you wouldn't want to happen to you in college or you wouldn't want to cause in college, there's something that I could put on that list that every young man would say would be number one, and here it is. I wouldn't ever want to make my parents lose their home and make my parents lose their retirement fund. And that can absolutely happen to you within fraternity life. It does, and I have talked to people for whom that happened. It's not a frequent thing. It's not a common thing. I don't want to overly catastrophize it, but here is absolutely something you can tell them that's a real world scenario. You could be having a party at your fraternity house. Are there risk violations going on? Yeah, but they're not huge ones. You're down in the basement, you're playing beer pong, it's a great night, 3 girls come in, they're really trashed, you kind of notice them, but you don't really notice them, you're a little drunk yourself. There's some booze, some hard alcohol, somebody pours some into their cups, you're not really watching, maybe you pour a little in, but they leave, they go off and they leave out to the rest of the fraternity parties, and you have your night, and you haven't really done anything terrible, you haven't done anything I would judge as morally terrible, pouring a little alcohol in a girl's cup. I don't think that's a moral, I mean, it's a violation of risk management policy. I don't think that's a terrible thing to have done. And the next morning, everybody rolls up, everybody's kind of the worse for wear, and then you realize, no, those girls were really drunk and 2 of them left. And one of them went to the utility closet and vomited and choked on her vomit and is dead. And you were down in that basement and you poured some alcohol in that cup and you broke a whole bunch of risk management policies, and you absolutely could be a named person in a lawsuit. And you know what the fund of money is going to be? It's not going to be your fraternity. They're going to rightly cut you loose. You violated all that. And think of your mom and dad and think of everything they did to build up what the life they have. They're not young and starting out. They're older and getting ready to retire. And the first hit that's going to come is to their homeowner's insurance. And the second hit is they're not going to leave you out to dry, and they're going to get attorneys involved. And there are absolutely, it's not a huge number of people, but there are absolutely parents who've lost everything over the relatively minor moral lapses of a son in a fraternity, and that will get their attention. Because young men and women today are very respectful and loving and caring of their parents. And so you hold not just your own self in your hands when you do these things, you absolutely hold everything your parents worked for and built up. And I think I have seen with my own two eyes that, see how quiet it is right now? That gets people's attention. And I'm not going to catastrophize. I'm not going to. And in fact, they had put that on an underline of the story. They'd said, and parents losing homes. And I said, I can't. Again, about being a very factual place. Yes, I've talked to people. It's really rare. I don't want people to say we're being alarmists. But I think developmentally that gets the attention. So I think that's something for chapter presidents to think about. Because you can't get a young kid. You cannot get an 18-year-old to think about you might fall off a roof and get really injured. You couldn't, and I'm really a scaredy cat. It sounded like such a good idea to go swimming in a reservoir. It was you're young and it's first nights of college, you're out of your parents' house at last with all their stupid rules and all their anxiety, and you want to live and you're young, and it's just, the older you get, the more you remember, the poet through the force that through the green's fuse drives the flower. You're just full of this intoxicating force of youth, and it's finally unleashed. You're not ready to hear a bunch of rules.
And can I make a quick point on that? Because I love hearing Caitlin talk about it. So what I'm about to say to you is meant with the utmost respect and love, and there's no but it's a hard truth. So my nephew, who now is 25 and lives out on the West Coast, but when he was a younger man, my brother-in-law, in a moment of profound stupidity, gave him the keys to a sports car. And within a relatively quick period of time, he was clocked going an insanely high speed by the Virginia State Police. And my sister called me, because they always call me when they need a lawyer. And so we had, which is more frequent than it should be. And so we had a conversation, and my sister said, but I looked at him and he seemed so responsible, and I think he was 20 at the time. And I said, let me explain this to you. And this is the ultimate challenge for any fraternity, and especially the ones in the room, because you young men are the leaders and you're not the people that we're worried about, right? I said, here's the deal. I'm talking to my sister. I said, so when you looked at him and he seemed so credible, judgment is a result of two things: life experience and a fully formed frontal lobe. He has neither. Your fully formed frontal lobe happens for young men around 25, 26. And so there was a recent article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that said, what possible business would run the model that fraternities have, which is handing over complete responsibility to run these operations to people who do not have a fully formed frontal lobe and don't have good judgment. Now, I say that to you as I disagree with that particular author's point. At UVA, we have a tradition, since we're all UVA people, of student self-governance. Fraternities are based on a model of self-governance. You have the majority of votes at this convention, same thing in the Pike Convention. You run these businesses as chapters. I believe a young man at 18, a young man at 22, 23 are very different, because I think you're learning a great deal, you're maturing so much. One of the loves I have for my fraternity and my college is that I truly grew up there. I mean, I went from being a boy when I came to school to being pretty close to a man when I left. But the challenge we face as an organization, you as the chapter president, and I don't know, what is SigEp called? Do you have a fancy name for your president of your chapter like a lot of fraternities do, or is it just president? Chapter president, I like that. That's good.
Makes it easy.
I mean, some of them are very dramatic, like Sigma Nu is commander, and SAE is like eminent archon, and ours is SMC, and I always wanted eminent anyway. But
we still have time in our legislative session if someone wants to introduce that.
Laying that aside, the point I want to drive home for you is, you've got a big job as president or as treasurer or as risk manager, whatever your role may be, and you are managing a tough operation because you are managing a group of testosterone-fueled, judgment-impaired individuals, right? And that's why the alcohol is so dramatic. When Caitlin talked about Phi Delta and their experience with claims, nobody can argue that, right? When Phi Delta made that decision, which was pretty bold, to go with their alcohol-free housing, and nobody's naive, we know they rent venues and they do things and they have parties. But it is remarkable, because I was a skeptic when that happened, and I got to tell you, it's remarkable what the result of that has been. And if you look at a place like UVA with some pretty talented students and a great Greek system, we had 3 straight honor chairs who were Phi Delts. Last year, Phi Delta had the student body president and the chairman of the honor committee at UVA. What's happening is they are drawing young men who want to be leaders, who don't want the risk and the drama of a place that's just a drunken, and cups are all over the floor in the morning. And I have to tell you, I have become a believer, and I've advocated in my own fraternity that there is something to be said for us recognizing the reality of the fact that we are talking about 18 to 22-year-old young men, and if we're going to be successful, we've got to have some parameters that may not be always the most popular, but that make tremendous sense, because we don't need groups of people going to the quarry and swimming at 3 in the morning, because when a death happens, everybody the next day goes, what were they thinking? We've got to do better about that. And I'm just being honest with you as somebody who loves fraternity. We've got to think more creatively around that.
And I would add to that just briefly, Bob Biggs, who's whatever the name is for the person who runs Phi Delta, I sat down with him, actually in Nashville, now that I think about it, a few months ago, and I said, why did you do this? Why did you go to alcohol-free housing? And he said, Caitlin, we looked down and said, what's the number one word we associate with fraternity? Leadership. And he said, what are the biggest problems on American campuses? What are the biggest problems that the presidents of the universities and colleges say we don't know how to solve? Alcohol misuse and sexual assault. That's the presidents and the boards are saying, we can't solve that. And Phi Delta said, well, we can solve it. We can be leaders. We'll get alcohol out of the house. Look, they said at Phi Delta, they decided, are we really going to be leaders? Are we going to really put skin in the game and say we're about leadership and we're about leading this institution and not being kind of a parasite on the institution? Are we willing to do this? And they did, and they are truly, as you're saying, it's that concept of leadership isn't just some vague word, they're really doing it.
So, Alan, one last question before we open up to the audience for sake of time here. And Caitlin just talked about this, we call ourselves leaders. Mm-hmm. And we talk about this a lot on our campuses. We sell it to new members. It's how we communicate to our alumni. You are involved in higher education and a leader in a lot of these conversations. We are a guest of institutions. Yes. And yeah. What should we be doing? What should we be thinking? When we go back to our campuses, what do we need to take action on in order to continue to be leaders, continue to be relevant on those campuses? Yeah,
I'll be real quick because I know we want to try to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. So we've got to start these conversations, and I do this all the time as a fraternity man, understanding that we exist to try to further the mission of the host institution. Right? We as fraternities exist to help advance that educational mission of the host. So everything that we do, we need to ask ourselves, is this furthering the mission of educating young men? And if the answer is yes, then that's good. And I would argue that a lot of times the answer is probably going to be no, and we got to rethink that. Right? One issue is academics. I'm lucky. As the Dean of Students at UVA, I'm able to say to faculty when questions come up about the fraternity system that for, I think, every year that I have been the dean, and for many years before that, our all-Greek men's average is actually higher than the all-men's average at Virginia. Same is true for the women. So I'm that rare dean of students that can say to my faculty that my fraternity men have a higher GPA than the all-men's average. That is not usually the case, and we've got to change that dynamic. We have got to challenge our young men, because the way to explain to people when they say fraternities are anti-intellectual is to show that, in fact, our young men are performing above the norm at campuses. I gave you the example earlier, and I'll reiterate it again. We've got to recognize that we have a partnership with institutions. I think the vast, vast, vast majority of people in Greek life offices or deans of students are people of good character, and they want to do the right thing, and so we've got to work cooperatively when something happens and not circle the wagons and obstruct. You know, I had to close down one of our fraternity chapters a couple of years ago, and the National agreed with me in a hazing investigation, and the primary problem in that case was that we were able to find out that they were lying to their national, they were lying to us, they were obstructing the investigation. Well, once something like that happens, you can't do business with those people. You cannot have that group continue to function if there's going to be that kind of a vacuum of honesty. So the more we can do to actually execute in our lives the values we say we stand for, right? To show that we're part of the educational mission, that we're trying to make our young men better leaders, but better scholars, better individuals all the way around, that we have a true partnership with the host institution, that we build those relationships, that we're honest, and that I mentioned on sexual assault, that we are out in front of this, that we are the young men that are doing the right thing, that we are the people that are holding discussions on campuses about the fact that this is a problem, and we want to join with young women in figuring out how we stop this. And then let me be very clear about this last piece. We have been dreadful as an industry at holding individuals accountable. And I can't tell you how many times over my life as a fraternity man that I have seen a situation that could have been resolved so effectively if the fraternity itself had turned to that brother and said, you are responsible for this, you must be accountable, and in many cases, guys, you must leave, all right? You must leave. If we would do that, instead of saying, well, we're gonna circle the wagons around this one or two people that did something deplorable, then we go down. Then we go down together, and I don't know that that's an honorable thing. So, you know, I have said, when I used to be the executive director, when I used to be the Brian of Pike, you know, I used to say to my chapters, the reason the universities are smacking us around is because they've lost confidence in our ability to manage ourselves. And if the chapters would hold their individual brothers accountable with real consequences, I think the universities would be much more likely to then stand on the sidelines and say, that seems to be a good outcome.
Thank you. We have questions that we're now going to take from the audience, and I believe that they've been passed over to Seth. Seth, do you want to ask a few?
Yeah, we've received a lot of questions, so we're going to try to throw out the most popular ones. Alan or Caitlin, what role do women play in the necessary change that needs to occur with fraternities? And are sororities contributing to the dark power?
Caitlin, why don't you take the first shot?
I think sororities are part of the problem. I think sororities are very quick, very, very quick to cover up things for fraternities. Look, I'll tell you another horrible story from my past. I was in a sorority, and gosh, this is an awful story, but I tell it, why not? Awful about me and my sorority sisters. Again, the mindset. So while I was a student at Virginia, there was a hideous accident. Sigma Chi guys, they were going over the hill to another event and to another campus, and they all had piled into a U-Haul, and they were drinking, and the U-Haul fishtailed, and a bunch of them died. And in my sorority house, we were to have had a mixer with them on Sunday, and for 2 days, all anybody could say is, so is the mixer off? These guys had died. These guys had died. And we were so young and stupid and horrible and unable to grasp death. But we were a brand new sorority, and it was a big deal that, like, we had, you know, we're going to have this mixer with Sigma Chi. And then somehow we got our heads out of where they shouldn't have been and just said, wait a minute, these guys are dead. We're having funerals on campus. We're having memorial services. And I think there can be this idea that sororities want to maintain these relationships of mixers and of, you know, certain ties between sororities and fraternities, and they will really preserve that, and they will really stand up for the guys in the face of some bad behavior. Not always, but sometimes I see sororities as part of the problem. What is the role of women? I don't think it's the role of women to correct this. I think it's the men's role to correct their organization. It's the men's role to decide who are we and what are we going to be.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, and I agree, Caitlin, the only thing I'll add to that, there has been some writing in the last year of people suggesting that one of these big problems is the fact that the sorority houses are dry, and if the women controlled the space where the alcohol was being served, that might change behavior. I mean, it's an intriguing thing to discuss. I agree with you. At the end of the day, people are responsible for their own actions. I will say that, and I have said this very candidly to my friends in the NPC when I was the NIC chairman, which my friends effectively call the head fraternity man of the world. You know, and I've said very much to the folks on the sorority side of the national equation that, you know, you all, though, have got to stop saying that we're pure as the driven snow, and that's all they're responsible, and we know nothing about this, you know, because it's not true. Because every social mixer that happens, for example, at UVA involves a sorority planning with the fraternity to come over, and it is a joint operation. And when we have, although we have deferred rush at UVA, when our young men and our young women as first years pledge their organizations in January, February, we have had some issues in the past where the sororities think it's funny to send the sorority pledges over to the fraternity house, and I had a case recently where the sorority tried to get some of the young men from a fraternity to come to the sorority pledges and do a striptease. I mean, this is ridiculous. And so I say this because there is a responsibility in the same way that we are challenging you to manage your house.
Seth, you want to do another one?
Do you think that having alcohol-free housing really solves the problem, or does it just push the problem off campus?
I'll start with that because of the Phi Delta example. So I was in Nashville 5 or 6 years ago speaking to a group that is the risk managers of colleges and universities. And it was 4 of us that were on a panel. One of them is the late Jim Favor, who founded a fraternity insurance agency and really was considered an expert in the field. And Jim was touting Phi Delta's success, and Caitlin gave you the statistics of showing their claims dropping. And I said, okay, but I want to give a counterpoint to that. For example, at UVA, there's a dry Phi Delta house, but then down the street, some of the brothers rent a satellite house and they have some parties there. And I said, so help me, and we were talking about this last night, so help me understand, I said to Jim, how that's not the same thing. And he said, Alan, all I can tell you is the claims history is phenomenally different than any other fraternity. And so I started to reflect on that, and I made this comment last night when we were all sitting around chatting. There is something about the psychology of a fraternity saying we're going to have alcohol-free housing in our chapter house that impacts the behavior of the men that both choose to join there and our brothers. Because while my Phi Delta chapter at UVA may have a satellite house, it is true that they are attracting a high caliber of young men who are leading at the institution, that they nationally and locally do not have the claims issues that we see other places, or I can speak for the chapter that I have at UVA, don't seem to have any of the hazing issues and the other problems. So it is very clear to me, having looked at this now for a long time, that when you say your house is alcohol-free, or even as I've seen some houses say, that the common spaces are alcohol-free in the house, maybe you can have a drink in your room, but not in a reckless way, it does change the collective mindset and behavior. It does impact the culture that is that fraternity chapter in ways that are, as far as I can tell, uniformly positive.
And I know also that a problem in fraternities, an issue, is that although membership is open to all races, you know, when I come to these organizations, it's all very, very largely white, and there's an issue here that Phi Delta is already seeing some change around, which is that when you look at campus drinking by race, the lowest drink, the racial group that drinks the least on American college campuses are African Americans. A lot of reasons for this. A lot of them have come from a culture where to get ahead, and you know, the consequence for drinking or drug use is not, oh, mom and dad put you back on the right path. Oftentimes it's incarceration. You know, there's a lot of reasons for it, a lot of cultural traditions, but you're missing out on a phenomenal group of young men who just see fraternities as places, the old historically white fraternities, that's just a place where they drink all the time. And that's just not something I have any interest in being part of. And also, that's a place where laws are broken all the time and they're getting in trouble all the time. And race relations and race realities being what they are, that's not a very safe place for me to be, a place that gets investigated by the cops now and then. And to me to be the sole African-American brother in that house with all that alcohol and all the mess that comes with that, is that a good idea? So I think a lot of positive things can flow and have been flowing at Phi Delta from that decision. I know it's a very hard one to sell to anybody, but that's another positive outcome that I think comes with it, more racial diversity in the fraternity.
Caitlin, in your opinion, is the world better off without fraternities? And if the
Fine.
answer is no,
Leave now.
if the answer is no,
Yeah.
describe the fraternity that you would want your son to join.
My sons will not join a fraternity because I cannot afford, I have worked very, very hard to build my retirement. And when I read this stuff, when I really did my reporting and saw that they could hold my retirement in their hands for being in the wrong place at the wrong time in a fraternity, I just thought, I can't take that risk. I can't take it. And that's a really weird thing because on the one hand, you go to college, you're 18, you're a man, you're grown. Mom's not there anymore, like you're going to soccer and you're finishing the season, whether you like it or not. I don't care if you like the coach, It's like now it's your turn to choose your organizations. Now it's your turn to flake out and drop out. Mom's not there with her sunblock and her, car seat and everything. But this one decision could really capsize my and my husband's financial planning, and I don't want to be, and I don't want to put them in that situation, but more importantly, I don't want to put myself. So there's that. Now, fraternities, I think you guys are at a real historical crossroads because I think there are things that I really dislike that are going on American college campuses that involve things like freedom of speech, that involve things like alternate positions on things being okay, that involve things like, that maybe a conservative idea could be presented alongside a more liberal idea and that both could be discussed and could be open to debate and wouldn't be shouted down. And I think fraternities are kind of in a position to stand up for what used to be majority ideas that are now kind of becoming minority ideas. I think fraternities are posed to be at a very important and potentially essential place in this kind of critical moment in American higher education. I think you guys could lead in all sorts of ways around this, but if you don't really reform, that moment will be lost. And you know what happens to anybody who writes a positive fraternity piece? I've seen it happen to a journalist named Nicole Allen. You write a really positive fraternity piece, and like the next day, there'll be a huge, hideous event that happens at a fraternity somewhere, and it'll be a chapter of the same one you just wrote a beautiful piece about. And it'll be really ugly. And about the clickbait stuff, I would say this. The thing, why is there so much, and forget that Rolling Stone atrocity situation. The thing about fraternities, they'll always say, why is there this relentless coverage on the bad stuff? Why not more coverage on the good stuff? It's not an issue of proportionality. The bad stuff is a tiny proportion compared to the good stuff. It's an issue of scale. When something goes wrong in a fraternity, you're talking about a dead young person, an otherwise healthy young person who's dead. You're talking about a young woman who's been raped. You're talking about somebody who was the inflicted trauma of hazing. You're talking about something that is just when you have a healthy young American college student and that has befallen that student and it's taken place within the context where there's a long pattern of that, that's news. That's certainly local news, and I could argue it's probably also national news. And so that's just an ongoing problem. But I think that fraternities, probably more than at any time in their history, could be a powerful force for good on colleges.
Do you want to respond to anything, Alan?
No, I mean, if I had a son, of course, I would have a slightly different view, but I understand Caitlin's concerns. I think they're very real, and the older you get, the more worried you are about those kinds of things. I believe that, as I said at the very outset, I think the first question you tossed to me, I believe fraternity has the potential, and I've seen it in reality, to be such a fundamentally good thing for a young man. And so I'm a strong believer in the merits of fraternity. I agree with the crossroads issue. I do think that fraternity is at a crossroads. I think some of us at the highest levels have been talking about this for the last several years, and I think the jury is out on which path we're going to take, and my hope is that we take the positive path. I will say, and I've said this to the IFC leaders at UVA, and now I'm going to talk about the diversity piece that Caitlin raised. I have seen real improvement at UVA on the IFC fraternities becoming more open and welcoming to a diverse group of young men, and I think that's hugely important. And there's a talk that I give to young professionals in higher ed about the economic realities of financing college, but one of the things I show them are the demographic projections that are coming. And I say, and I've said this to my young fraternity leaders at UVA, I say, the bottom line is the United States and certainly the college-age population is going to be changing dramatically in the coming decade. And if a fraternity chapter has not created an environment within which it is welcoming and open to a cross-section of young men of different races and ethnicities and backgrounds, et cetera, it is going to put itself out of business. Because not only will the volume and the pool of people begin to dry up in terms of just the percentages, but there's been plenty of research done on the mindsets of your generation, and people are repelled in large numbers by things that they weren't repelled by when I was your age, okay? When I was your age, the concept of the lily white fraternity chapter was the norm, and nobody said anything about it, all right? Today, when you poll young people that are in college, they find that idea repugnant, and rightfully so. And so we have got to recognize that fact and become a more open and welcoming place. And if we fail to do that, we can't be surprised if society turns against us, not because of the risk issues, but because we simply don't reflect where this country needs to find itself.
So we're running out of time, and I'm thinking this conversation could probably go on for the rest of the day. We have now just standing room only in the back of the room. We still have a few days of our conclave here. Hundreds of students, hundreds of volunteers that are here. If are any concluding thoughts that you'd like to share with those that are in attendance, that we can take back to our campuses, or that we can do over the next few days while we're here and can legislate and have these good, thoughtful dialogues, what would you ask us to do?
If you're looking at me and you want me to start, I would say a couple of quick things. One is, I would remember why we were founded in the first place, which is so easy to forget. Fraternities came, and all of our fraternities came around the same time in the United States, most of us, and within a certain number of decades. They were founded because colleges had become illiberal places, meaning you couldn't have open dialogue. Faculty were cracking down on free speech. They were cracking down on the ability to associate. And so when you look around at the history of our fraternities, in many cases they were founded by intelligent young men who wanted an environment within which to flourish and grow intellectually. And quite frankly, after World War II, we started to lose that mission and operate in a very different way. And now if you ask a lot of people what fraternity means, it's, well, I want that great place to party, where the big parties are, where I can do things that I can't do otherwise. And so my takeaway is, number one, I said it earlier, and it's not just a platitude. I think you are members of a great fraternity. And I think SigEp has been a leader in a number of areas that are very important. But that work is only embryonic. It is not at all finished. And I think there are a lot of things that you need to do to make this organization vibrant and viable. I think Caitlin has talked about things like free speech. I think free speech is under attack on campuses around the country. I think fraternities can be a great place that makes that argument for fostering free speech. I don't think there's been tremendous leadership by anybody on the issue of preventing sexual assault. I think you could lead the way on that. I think you could have initiatives and programs, and quite frankly, by your actions in what you do. I mean, we've seen such a growth in bystander intervention training. I was on a White House call the other day about a big program that they're in the second year of. You know, if fraternity men at parties, when they see something that they know to be wrong, would step in and stop it, we could make such a dent in this problem, and we could be seen as the leaders in preventing it across the entire campus. So there are so many opportunities. The last thing I'll say is this, and I say this to our students all the time: you are so much sharper and stronger than we were when we were your age, okay? You are so much more impressive on so many levels than we were. And so what I keep waiting for is that talent that we lacked, that drive, that interest that you are so much better than we were, to manifest itself into action. And so that's my challenge to you, is over the next few days, is have these conversations with each other and with the leaders of the fraternity about how do we get in front of all these kinds of challenging issues and pool that talent that we have to make a difference, and also at the same time hold each other accountable to true standards.
So Caitlin, you've mentioned the need to evolve. You said that we're at a historic crossroads. What concluding thoughts would you like to share with the group?
Well, I would just give you all a tremendous, I wrote a long, harsh, in many respects, harsh article, and I want to give you an incredible, a very sincere compliment. That's maybe too light of a word, but I want to tell you my respect for you. That's what I want to say. I can guarantee you, if I had written that long of an article with that deep criticism about a cause, a feminist cause, there is no way in hell I would have been invited to an event. My thoughts would have been ridiculed. I would have been marginalized out of that. There would have been a session just dedicated to tearing down the article. That you all said, come, so you have some interesting things to say. Come, we respect that. We'd like to learn more. We're in a process of self-evaluation. You know, we want you to come and we want you to tell us what you've learned. Not that we agree with you 100%. Or even 50%, but you took us seriously enough, you got our attention, come here and we're going to treat you very well and very respectfully, and that is the basis of this movement for free speech on college campuses that I'm so adamant about right now, that somebody could come and give opposing ideas and even say her kids, she wouldn't let them be in a fraternity, that you'd let her be here and share her ideas, and you wouldn't shout her down, and you wouldn't say you're not coming here, and you wouldn't do some ugly gesture, but you just in good faith ask questions. That is probably the most important thing American campuses need right now, truly. So I just have tremendous respect for you all for that, and I want to thank you for that.
As we conclude, please help me in thanking Alan and Caitlin for their time with us.